I wanted to introduce our first keynote speaker, Dr. Marcius Extavour. Those of you who know Marcus, he is a leader in the carbon removal industry. Marcus is an air miner, a nominee and winner in the Carby Awards in 2020, and of course, the Vice President of Energy and Climate at XPRIZE. Welcome, Marcus.
Thank you so much, Tito. It's great to be here. Someone yell at me if the audio and video is not working, but I think we're all set up, and so I'm just going to jump right in. Now, I'm thrilled to be here with you. Thanks for inviting me. Shout out to the Carbys. I love that that was set up. I'm not just saying that because I was lucky enough to be nominated and win, but I think it's a great initiative because it kind of shows the spirit of the community, and it shows that we're kind of on a growth path. What I'd love to do today is really try to help frame some of our conversations in the conference today. I'll just take a few minutes to run through some of my thoughts about where the space is now and where we're headed. I'm not going to sort of get too deep into the technical depths. I think we have sessions to get at that, but I'd just love to share some high-level thoughts about how I see things going. So let me try to push the buttons and share my screen. So bear with me for a moment. Okay. Now, somebody please give me a signal if you can see these slides, but not on full screen. Good to go. Okay. I'm going to assume yes and plow forward. Okay, so as I said, a couple of thoughts on where I think carbon removal is and where we're going, and then we'll have some time for some discussion and Q&A. I'll say right now, I'm of course excited to talk about XPRIZE carbon removal, but I'm not going to so much present that right now. Of course, I'm happy to take questions. I've called this Carbon Removal 2.0, and I'm going to explain what I think that means in a second. Of course, I just want to acknowledge that this is not the only thing in our lives, and this is especially the case internationally. I was lucky enough to get a second vaccine, and LA, where I live, is entering level yellow, which I think means more stuff indoors, starting to slowly return to normalcy. But I just want to note that that's not the case everywhere. We see India's in the news, but this is going to be something we're talking about, and it's just something to remember as we think about collaboration and cooperation and our work over the next 6 months, 1 year. We'll see. It's okay to acknowledge that, but it's also okay to press on with, I think, what our work is here. Carbon dioxide removal is having a moment. No one can deny that. There's more interest, there's more discussion, there's more attention. Just the info that Jason and Tito told us about how AirMiners is growing and exploding. I think those are really great data points. But why am I calling it 2.0? All right, here is Marcus's very quick and dirty summary of the carbon removal conversation to date. With full apologies to actual practitioners and people that are working in the space, this is an extremely simplistic summary. I'm going to call the carbon removal 0.1 period, which was basically everything leading up to when we hit 350 ppm. And the conversation was, is this actually doable? How would you possibly consider doing carbon dioxide removal? It is interesting. It's a little curious. Maybe this will one day be something, but it's too hard to tell. Specifically, is this relevant to climate intervention? The carbon removal 1.0 period is, I'm going to map it as roughly 400 to 415 ppm in time. This is when people started to say, all right, it's definitely doable. People like Klaus Lackner really led the way here to talk about and show that, look, carbon removal is definitely doable. Some of the other leaders in the field, like Global Thermostat, Carbon Engineering, Climeworks, of course, people that we know, they're already doing it. And I think the big thing that marked carbon removal 1.0 for me was the IPCC 1.5 degree report, which essentially said, if we want to stay under 1.5 or 2 degrees, we need carbon removal. It's not a maybe one day in the future. It's we definitely need it in addition to dramatic CO2 reductions. Carbon removal 2.0, I think, is where we are today. We, unfortunately, just crossed 420 ppm. But now I think the energy is, let's get on with it. Let's do it. Not can it be done, but how do we do it? How do we do it quickly? How do we do it more at a larger scale? And what's involved? And so I think that's where we are now, and that's why I'm calling it carbon removal 2.0. I think this group today has a great opportunity to really shape what CDR 2.0 means, and I think that's part of the purpose of our conference today. But there's a lot to do. Here's a laundry list of things. I'm not going to hit on all of them. The point is, it's a long list. There's a lot of work to do. But I just want to touch on a couple. Of course, a gigaton is a lot. I'm an engineer. I like to think I'm a pretty numerate person. It's just staggering to think about how big of a number that is, even if 1 gigaton is a target. And we know that there are many others that are proposing that several gigatons or even tens of gigatons of carbon removal over the next few decades is where we need to be. It's big. It's a lot. The second bullet is a really interesting one. We've gone from a place of essentially no demand for carbon removal. I think carbon removal 0.1 and 1.0, that's where I was calling it, now to people dramatically asking for negative emissions technologies, but with extremely limited supply. You can't buy 1 million tons of net negative removal today, even if you wanted to, or if not buy, deploy. People are working towards that, but you can't do that as of today's date. By the way, this is one of the reasons we were excited to launch an XPRIZE in this area. The other items here, these are things I think we're familiar with. Credits and markets, those are developing, but what does that mean? How do they mature? How do they get defined? The need for funding is ever present. That's not going away. Corporates and governments are starting to become interested. They may have unreasonable expectations about how quickly this can go. That's something we'll have to manage. I think we really need real projects and examples. I don't think I'm saying anything controversial there. Just a couple of other things here too. The language, that we use is sometimes can be confusing for outsiders. That's okay, that's normal, but just to be aware of carbon negative, capture, removal, sequestration, these are words we use interchangeably. They don't exactly all mean the same thing. That's okay, but it's something to be aware of as the community grows to try to get ahead of creating confusion. And look, let's face it, I say engaging critics and naysayers, not everyone thinks carbon removal is a good idea. That's okay. I think now's the time to continue to have those open conversations. What is the balance between removal and emissions reductions? Something I am really trying to train myself to do is whenever I speak about carbon removal, make sure I say really clearly, this is not a replacement for CO2 emissions reductions. It can't be. It can't be a distraction from doing that, but it is something we also have to do in parallel. I think we're going to continue to have those dialogues about bringing carbon removal into the mainstream climate conversation. For me, that's one on the to-do list for the next couple of years. Now, of course, that pile of to-dos, that's a lot of work to do, but there's also opportunity here. There's the opportunity to actually demonstrate working removal. Despite all of our interest and progress here, there are still very few actual demonstrations of removal taking place. We need more of those, clearly. The second bullet is a really big one. We always talk about cost. How much does it cost? Cost, cost, cost. This is the nature for every new environmental technology, every technology generally. We also have to find a way to speak about the value. We're doing this because there's value to preserving our climate and balancing our climate. But how do we talk about that in a way that policymakers, the business community, NGOs, and regular people can understand? It's a tricky thing to do, but it's a huge opportunity. Another bullet I'm thinking out here, and this is sort of a wish list of things I would love the AirMiners community to take up on, and I know some people are working on these things already. Creating a roadmap. What does it look like to get to, let's say, total capacity of 1 megaton per year? Carbon engineering, for instance, is working on a facility that can get to that size. That's direct air capture. What about 100 megatons per year? What does that look like as a community to get there? What about a gigaton? What does that look like? How many projects deployed where? In the same way that these kind of maps get made for other fields, I think developing something like that for CDR would be great. If one exists, let me know. I haven't seen that yet. Push back on the greenwash. We just have to be careful about this. There will be bad actors that choose to position carbon removal as an excuse to not reduce emissions. I'm calling that out because it's something we always have to be conscious of. I don't think that is where this community wants to take this, and I personally don't see that as the role of carbon removal, but you can see that there is that temptation, and so I point out that some people will position carbon removal that way. The last bullet is something I've addressed as well, but I just think we can't say it enough. Carbon removal is not meant to undermine the dramatic and immediate GHG emission cuts that we just need. It's a complement and in parallel too. Now, a cultural aspect that I want to address, and I've just got a couple more slides before I'll close and we can get to some Q&A. We are going to go through some growing pains. We're a community that's relatively small, but growing quickly. And one of the things that I've noticed in clean tech and energy and other technology communities I've been part of, as things grow, it can be a little tricky to dramatically grow a community when it's been kind of the same lonely warriors working in a field, and then all of a sudden a bunch of new people are coming in. for both sides. On the one hand, the people that have been working in it for a while, there's an influx of new people. They're asking basic questions. Maybe you feel like you've been answering those questions over and over. And if you're a new person, it feels like there's a lot to come up to speed with, but also it's still a pretty wide open topic or an open field, and there's a lot of opportunity everywhere. What I'm trying to do is say here that for all of us, myself included, but for all of us, let's just be kind to each other. There will be new people that come in, and you know what? They're going to ask a bunch of newbie questions. That's fine. In fact, that's good. We want to grow the carbon removal community. We don't want this to be 150 people talking to each other year after year. If carbon removal is going to reach the levels that we think it needs to have a positive impact on our climate, we need more people from more backgrounds with different perspectives coming at the problem, trying to figure out how to deploy removal, where, in what type, how to refine solutions, the policy, the capital, the social license, the equity and justice, the public perception, all of those things. Growing the tent is good. Yes, there will be some growing pains. So to the people that really are OG carbon removal folks, we're going to be looking to you for your leadership and your guidance. Please share your knowledge and wisdom, and forgive us if we're just a little bit annoying with new questions. And for people that are new, please don't be afraid to ask questions. You may feel like you're drinking from a fire hose when you first get started, but reach out to folks. I have found the community pretty warm and welcoming. And so I encourage you to take advantage of that. The last thing I want to say, and I highlighted in pink, there may be some growing pains as the space grows, but this is actually an opportunity for us to all get better, to get to another level. That's why I called it 2.0, to raise our game, the level of scrutiny, discussion, analysis, challenge. These are all good things because they'll get us to a better place. Now, a couple of words of advice for people that are especially new, and especially really young people. Maybe you're a student, or maybe you're just starting out in your career and you're interested in carbon removal. I think there are a couple of opportunities that especially young people can lead the charge on. One is to help connect carbon removal conversation to the broader climate conversation. There has been some traditional resistance, I think, sometimes because if corporates are for it, it can be seen as suspicious from the traditional environmental NGO community. And I completely understand that. But I think some honest and careful conversation about how carbon removal fits into a broader climate intervention agenda, I think is ongoing work. And I think young people are in a great position to do that. Make friends with a startup, of course. Maybe you get involved. Maybe you just get to know some folks over there, because a lot of these groups are going to be at the cutting edge of making solutions happen. If you already have a job, maybe you have a job at an institution that doesn't seem that it's at the cutting edge or is that interested in carbon removal. Especially if you work at a corporation, guess what? ESG is hot right now. Every company with a balance sheet and a public board cares about ESG in a serious way. This is a strategic opportunity to open a conversation about what would it mean for us to think about carbon removal? What would it mean for us to look at our scope 3 emissions? What would it mean for us to consider getting involved in this effort in that community? So even if you are already placed at a company that doesn't seem like a carbon removal company, maybe there's a path for you to work on it in your day job through ESG. For the scientists, I came from a science background. This is general advice I always give. Learn some finance and economics. Don't go crazy, but learn a little bit. This is the broader language of policy, of business, of funding, and learning a little bit here will take you a long way. On the other side of the coin, for the non-scientists, just learn a little bit of science and tech. You don't need a degree to get into here, but never be afraid to ask questions. Ask questions of folks you may have met at a startup or other technical friends you have. It's okay to ask people to explain a topic in a really simple way. For me personally, that's the only way I've ever learned anything, and I encourage you to be open. And again, this is a way we can grow our community, is by being receptive to these kind of questions and really trying to take it forward. Okay, the last thing I want to say, and this is of course a shameless plug, if you're a young person, if you're a student, XPRIZE Carbon Removal, that competition that I hope you've heard of, has a specific student competition track. We're looking for proposals, not demos, but just proposals in the first instance. You've got to be a student or part of a group of students, that are a team that's led by students. And the deadline is October 1st. So this is a really tangible thing that you could consider jumping into if you're a young person, especially a student, looking to really make an impact here. With that, I just want to say thank you very much. I'm really thrilled this conference is happening. I'm thrilled to be a part of it. Thank you for inviting me. I'll unshare my screen and see if there's time for a bit of Q&A.
So feel free to ask your questions in the chat when you can, so that Marcus can answer them, and we'll take a look.
Okay, I see one here. Jason, should I just read them off, or do you want to?
Sure. I mean, yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. I see a question from Annie that says, wondering what the finance economic topics that others have found to be particularly helpful to learn. Oh, that's a great one. Well, for me, like, I mean, I was a science head, so I was basically a zero when it came to finance and economics. I just found really basic, like, economics for dummies was really helpful, like macroeconomic type of stuff. And then another thing that's helpful for me was a bit of more structured finance. How do investments work? What's venture capital? What's private equity? What are discount rates? What does that mean? I'm not trying to be condescending when I say that. I really, really start at like the baby beginning level when I'm trying to learn a new topic. Jack Sullivan is asking me to speak to the urgency. Sure. Yeah, interesting question. So I think there's been a lot of conversation about we only have a few years left to act. We only have a decade before we blow through a carbon budget. We need to scale carbon removal as quickly as possible. And actually, let me just say, we've heard some critical feedback of our prize design saying 4 years is too long. Why are you waiting so long? And I think we understand where that's coming from. I would turn it around and say it like this. The truth is we're basically starting from zero. And we have to crawl before we walk, and we have to walk before we run. That saying that you have to crawl before you walk is not the same thing as saying there isn't an urgency. There is. If we need to get to, let's say, a gigaton of removal, we need as many solutions tested and scaled as rapidly as possible. But first, we actually have to get things working and tested. In the context of the prize, we're saying you've got 4 years to get something up and running if you don't have something up and running already. And of course, bigger is better in general. And then for those that are already up and running, we need to deploy and scale those solutions as quickly as possible. So, I mean, I appreciate that you're raising that, Jack. I took it in a direction with the prize. I didn't mean to put words in your mouth, but there is an urgency here. But I think let's not let the urgency cloud our judgment and force us into sort of acting irrationally. I think we still have to do the steps, but do them as quickly as we can. I'm going to keep reading off these questions, and Jason, please just yell at me when we're out of time. Nick Philstress says, is the student competition open to graduate students? 100% yes. Our definition of student is anyone age 35 and under. This team has to be at least half students. That means you could have like a faculty advisor or another person. And people that aren't graduate students, like undergrads, are free to participate. If you're under 18, you need someone over 18 to sign up with you, but that's about it. Susan Fancy, any thoughts on leveling the playing field for CCU subsidies relative to fossil fuel subsidies? Great question. The fossil fuel subsidy conversation is a long and deep one. In my opinion, they will persist for a while. That's just a personal opinion. That's not a wish or a hope, but I think they will be hard to get rid of as quickly as we might like, especially around the world. On the other hand, let's see where US Congress takes it, and every country is different. That doesn't necessarily preclude new support for CCU or carbon removal or other things. Rob Niven, hello Rob. Congrats on winning the other XPRIZE. Are you feeling this moment if CDR is being felt globally or targeted in certain markets only? Great question. My opinion is that it is regionally clustered. I think it's no secret that people that use words like carbon removal and direct air capture tend to live in North America, specifically the United States, with Canada coming in as like a close second, and in Europe, specifically Northern and Western Europe. You might also know that that was also the locus of a lot of early climate change work. A lot of that initial thinking and work came from those regions. I think we have an explicit challenge in front of us to globalize it. I don't think socially and culturally it's going to fly very far for the global north to be perceived as generating yet another techno fix and suggesting or hectoring the global south that they should deploy it. That's kind of an extreme position, and I'm not saying that's where we are, but it can be viewed that way. I think a pathway to opening up carbon removal is to recognize that there's a lot of ways to do it. It doesn't have to be a machine made of metal. It doesn't have to be crushing and grinding of mine tailings. The nature-based solutions, specifically agricultural solutions, soil solutions, these are things that are common just about everywhere in the world, especially in the developing world, especially in the global south and the tropics. Agriculture, forestry, natural ecosystems, these things really matter. So to the extent that those systems can participate in carbon removal, that might be a way to have a broader conversation that doesn't sort of reduce it to a mechanical direct air capture machine, which is great, but is not going to be for everyone. Okay, Jeremy Epstein says, how do you see corporations with ESG goals interacting with carbon removal currently? And what opportunities do you see on the horizon, or would you like to see? Great question. I see interaction as, oh, is this the last one, Jason? Okay. I see the interaction so far as one, making net zero commitments and maybe peripheral allusion to carbon removal. That's not meant to be a critique, but I think that we're seeing that. Two, we're seeing actual purchases. Shout out Stripe, shout out Shopify, shout out Microsoft, shout out Amazon, shout out Apple. I think, although I need to read that one a little more carefully, but people doing procurement, I think, should be celebrated. I'd love to see more of that. Generally, I would love to see more private and public sector procurement or other pull for carbon removal solutions. Everyone is on board with net zero goals. Most groups don't have a detailed plan to get there. This is an entry point for us to say carbon removal could be part of that plan. I'm at my time. Thank you very much. I'd love to keep chatting through the conference and another time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Marcus.